It Was Almost Real, the Pro Wrestling History Podcast, Episode 71. Hello and welcome to this episode of It Was Almost Real, the Pro Wrestling History Podcast. My name is Ken Zimmerman Jr., and this is the podcast dedicated to the history of professional wrestling from 1870 to 1930. Sometimes we'll range a little bit further than that. I'm here for a solo episode this week where I'm going to talk about the early days of the Divided Championship era, which is going to be my next book project. But quick update, Dan is still doing okay. He's moved to a new medical facility, so we're still setting up the logistics to get him back on the show. Hopefully he'll be back on the next episode or two. And I'd like to get my sons in the studio for at least one episode so they can review a match or two from this year's Survivor Series. I got to get them to get on board with that idea, though. I know people have said in the past they enjoy their perspective because they're not only not traditional wrestling fans, they weren't professional wrestling fans at all as kids. I wasn't watching, so they didn't watch. And so they were more MMA fans and definitely didn't really watch professional wrestling. So before we get into this week's history topic, I wanted to quickly review an AEW match. At the end of the show, I'm going to talk about the very first Survivor Series, as I talked about the Starrcade 87, which was the NWA pay-per-view that the Survivor Series was created by Vince to go up against. I already reviewed that, so then I will talk about Survivor Series at the end of the show, but I know we don't do as much with AEW. That will probably change with them going to Max. I currently have Max, so I may review a few AEW things. The heart of this show will always be reviewing early things, and I am going to get back into looking at some of the 50s matches from Chicago that are still out there. But I did want to at least try to be fair and equal at times. So on this last pay-per-view that AEW had, they had their buy-in show that is free on YouTube. So you can still see this on YouTube. And I will put a link in the show notes. I think it was Wrestle Dream 2024. And this was the buy-in pre-show. I will have the link for the pre-show in the show notes at kenzermanjr.com/episode 71. But one of the matches in there was a four-way, which in general I normally hate. But Buddy Matthews was in this match. So since Buddy Matthews was in the match, I decided to go ahead and watch it. And it was Buddy Matthews, the Beast Mortos, Commander, and one of the Dante Martin, one of the Martin brothers. The things that were good about it, obviously Buddy and Beast Mortos are quite a bit bigger than Commander and Dante Martin. And they continued to tease at the beginning of the match Buddy and the Beast Mortos kind of getting their hands on each other. That was probably the thing that would be the most interest to most fans. But Commander and Dante kept interfering and stopping that from happening. And it was interesting at first. But then it started to get a little old. It's like, okay, guys, we've seen this 2 or 3 times now. You're starting to kind of kill it. Then it kind of became a typical modern match. And you had just a lot of spots. And the thing I didn't like about it, it was typical of a lot of these matches with a lot of these high-flying spots. Commander did an amazing walk across the top rope and jump. And the commentator, or jump onto the guys on the floor, and the commentator said, oh, he got all 3 of them. No, he didn't. He got Buddy and the Beast Mortos, but if you're going to have somebody to catch you, those are the 2 guys that I would want to have catch me. And so he chose the right 2 guys to dive onto. But it was a lot of guys standing around waiting for people so they could catch him. That always takes me out of it, and it took away some of my enjoyment for the match. It's about 12 minutes, and Buddy Matthews gets the victory. And I do want to say, Buddy Matthews is over with the AEW fans, and they haven't had a whole lot of reason to get behind him because he just recently lost to Adam Cole. He's kind of lost in this tag team, and they're not using him great. And he's still super over with these fans because he's an amazing athlete with a good build. He's in condition. He can do just about anything in the ring, and everything he does looks believable. He could be a huge star for them, but I'm afraid they would probably mess it up with what they've done with everybody else. The fans have definitely taken to Buddy Matthews. That's probably going to be it for the update this week. I just want to jump right into the main topic because I've started to research the Divided Championship era, which either dates from April 17th, 1925, if you're talking about the double cross of Zbyszko over Big Wayne or Wayne Big Munn, or it dates from Memorial Day 1925, May 30th, 1925, when Munn dropped the title back to Lewis, the title that was recognized in Michigan and Illinois. And then Zbyszko dropped the title that he won from Munn that most people recognize as a world title to Stecher in St. Louis on May 30th. And in effect, there were two claimants to the world title, and that would be that way until February of 1928. So for almost 3 years, you had two people claiming the world championship. And one of the claims for the reason that ended was because the Divided Championship confused fans, which it did, and it affected their ability to draw at the box office. Well, it didn't do that, at least in the beginning. And the Divided Championship did not hurt box office initially. I'm thinking as I researched the book that probably is going to change in 1927 because I don't see any other impetus for them to settle this and to reunify the title other than a loss of money at the box office. Because both of these camps were pretty well entrenched in their dislike for each other, and I will explain why I believe that in just a few minutes, but I want to go back over the particulars because when the double cross happens and then you have the Divided Championship, I think most of the people in professional wrestling, the insiders, the promoters, the managers, the wrestlers, thought that this feud would be settled not 3 years later, but within the next 6 months to a year. Within a week or two of Lewis and Stecher reclaiming the title, Lou Darrow offered, the Los Angeles promoter Lou Darrow, Diamond Lou Darrow, offered $50,000 for that match, and Tom Pax, the St. Louis promoter, and Ed White's group up in Chicago offered $60,000 to host a match between Stecher and Lewis to reunify the title. And I think everybody believed that it was going to happen sooner rather than later. So why then did it take 3 years to reunify the title? And part of that is the animosity between the two camps. So on one side, you had Billy Sandow, Ed Strangler Lewis, and Joseph Toots Mondt. And on the other side, you had Joe Stecher, his brother, Tony Stecher, and then you also had Jack Curley that had some skin in the game from New York, because all this animosity between Stecher and Lewis and Curley, Vladik Zbyszko and Lewis was because when Lewis won the title back from Zbyszko in April of 1922, Lewis refused to defend the title against two people. And it wasn't because he thought that they could defeat him. These were worked matches. And if it was a contest, Lewis was probably equal. He was definitely the equal of Vladik Zbyszko. He would have beat Zbyszko in a contest every day of the week and twice on Sunday. Stecher was always closer to Lewis in skill level. But when Lewis passed him in 1917, because they had 3 contests, deadly dull matches, between 1916 and 1917, and 2 were draws, and then Lewis finally won the 3rd match. But they were really close initially, but I think that it was one of those cases of where once Lewis passed Stecher, Stecher never caught back up with him, as we'll see in 1928 when they have a match to settle the promotional war. It starts as a shoot and ends as a work. At this point in time, the only person that really was on Lewis's level as a wrestler was Stecher or Stanislaw Zbyszko, not Wladek Zbyszko. Lewis disliked both Stecher and Wladek Zbyszko. With Wladek Zbyszko, it's a lot easier to understand. Wladek Zbyszko and Lewis wrestled each other for the first time in either 1914 or 1915 in Detroit. Could even have been 1913, but I'm pretty sure it's 14. Ended up in a fist fight, a legitimate fist fight. They were working with each other, got mad, and quit working with each other, and it developed into a fist fight. Caused a riot. The police had to clear the ring. And that was the first of many times that Lewis and Wladek Zbyszko had a wrestling match. Some were contests, most were works, but they devolved into fist fights because Lewis could not stand Zbyszko, and Zbyszko could not stand Lewis. With Stecher, it was only just a professional rivalry. Lewis and Stecher never had anything that was a big blow-up. They never had a significant issue professionally in the ring or business-wise outside of the ring other than this professional rivalry about who was the best legitimate wrestler. Even though Lewis had kind of surpassed Stecher in 1917, Lewis still kind of held a grudge against Stecher for being almost as good as he was, and he would not wrestle him from 1922 to 1925 for the 3 years that he held the title, and they were making money hand over fist. The Sandow promotion, known historically as the Gold Dust Trio. Now, there's a lot of debate about where that name comes from. A lot of people think Mott coined it, after the fact. They were known as the Gold Dust Trio in Marcus Griffith's books, The Fall Guys, from 1937. But historically, if you talk to most people and say the Gold Dust Trio, they know you're referring to Mott, or to Sandow, Lewis, and Mott. That group made a ton of money during those 3 years, and they resented some of the promoters from the past, so they started setting up things in Midwestern cities and that, so they would have to be less dependent on the real powerful promoters like Jack Curley. And they started to break away from Curley during that 1922 to 1925 time period. And they were basically able to force Curley to do what they wanted if Curley wanted to book the champion, because they were making enough money in Midwestern cities and Southern cities and cities like Philadelphia that Curley had to agree to their terms, and a lot of times their terms were Lewis wrestles a wrestler from the Gold Dust Trio promotion and not the local champion that had been built by local promoters like Curley or Paul Bowser in Boston, Tom Pax in St. Louis. And so Lewis just refused to wrestle Wladek Zbyszko, which made Jack Curley angry, and he refused to wrestle Joe Stecher, which made the Stechers angry. And I don't think anybody realized the depth of the anger between those groups when you had that double cross, because everybody thought, within 6 months the title will be reunified, and it took three years. And it's because Stecher resented greatly the fact that Lewis would not defend the title against him, because that kept him from having the most lucrative paydays. He didn't get to personally experience those huge paydays that the Goldust Trio was generating because he was frozen out of the world title picture. And it was the same thing for Vladik Zbyszko. So Lewis's refusal to wrestle them kept them from getting the biggest paydays of their career. And Stecher wasn't going to forget that anytime soon. So he says, when everybody's offering the big money, no, I'm just going to wait a little while. Lewis froze me out for 3 years, and I'm the legitimate champion. So now he can just wait until I decide to defend against him. For Lewis's part, Lewis was furious with Stecher for double-crossing Munn by having Zbyszko shoot on him. And he continued to act like he was the world champion, and he did not want to give any credibility to Stecher at all and Stecher's claim to the legitimate world title by trying to pursue a match with Stecher himself. So Lewis said he didn't need to wrestle Stecher. He was the world champion, and he would just continue to defend his title. Public opinion, though, initially, particularly in the newspapers, favored Stecher's claim over Lewis's. They all saw the machinations where Munn was still recognized as the world champion by Illinois and Michigan after he had lost to Zbyszko for what it was, a political ploy. And so the newspapers and that generally were supportive of Stecher's claim, not Lewis's. Pressure was going to continue to come from the promoters who were going to want to have the title reunified, because confusion with fans usually leads to smaller paydays. And as I said, that was not the case initially in 1925. They were still drawing good crowds. But I think as time wore on, that would not be the case. And in 1927, you're starting to see smaller crowds. I will let you know if that does indeed become the case when I continue to give or talk about this book project and what I discover. But for right now, I'm just going to end it there, that everybody thought that this was going to be over a lot sooner than it was, except for the main participants, Stecher and Lewis. Stecher and Lewis both knew that unless they were really forced to, they weren't going to end this stalemate anytime soon. I went and I watched the original Survivor Series in this past week. And I guess we tend to look in the past with rose-colored glasses. I had remembered this card being a lot better than it was. It was okay, but Starrcade was much better. And I think because this was free on cable, that it definitely did hurt Starrcade. But as far as quality wrestling shows, I think Starrcade was definitely the better show. There were a couple of things on Survivor Series I did like, but it's a 4-match card, so it won't take me long to go through everything. And the first one was basically a 5-on-5 match to further the Intercontinental feud between Randy Savage and Honky Tonk Man. Although that would end pretty soon, because Randy Savage was going to be Vince McMahon's pick to replace Hogan as world champion while Hogan was off shooting his movie. So in this match, you had Brutus Beefcake, Jake Roberts, Jim Duggan, Ricky Steamboat, who replaced Junkyard Dog, and Randy Savage with Miss Elizabeth. Randy Savage was the captain, against Dangerous Danny Davis, Harley Race, Hercules, the Honky Tonk Man, Ron Bass, and then the Honky Tonk Man with Jimmy Hart. Honky Tonk Man was the captain of his team. And at this match, because it's an elimination match, the baby faces were able to eliminate 4 of the heels with losing only 2 from their ranks. So at the end of the match, it was the Honky Tonk Man against Jake Roberts, Randy Savage, and Ricky Steamboat. And so Honky Tonk Man, being the true heel, just leaves instead of wrestling the 3 guys, giving the victory to Macho Man Randy Savage's team. And that was a good match to start the card. Then the next 2 matches, I'm going to say, were a little odd. People have said Vince doesn't care about women's wrestling or tag team wrestling, so maybe this was somebody else's thing that they were working on. And the next match, the Fabulous Moolah, the Jumping Bomb Angels, Rockin' Robin, and Velvet McIntyre wrestled Dawn Marie, Donna Cristanello, the Glamour Girls of Leilani Kai and Judy Martin, and with Sensational Sherry. And what I found out about this is Vince has a history of not knowing how to promote Japanese wrestlers. And the Jumping Bomb Angels did have a good run in WWE in 87, 88. But they were the survivors of this match. They were the ones that won. They won the match, which I was kind of shocked. I figured that they were going to either have Sensational Sherry or Velvet McIntyre, and it was the Jumping Bomb Angels, which I was happy with the result. I was just more than a little surprised with Vince's history with Japanese wrestlers. It's also why I suspect maybe someone else on the booking team, Pat Patterson or Bruce Pritchard, was more in tune to that. And it's the tag team one is a little less perplexing. You had the British Bulldogs, the former world champion, the Killer Bees, the Fabulous Rougeau Brothers, Strike Force, which was the current world champions, Rick Martel and Tito Santana, and the Young Stallions of Jimmy Powers and Paul Roma, took on the Bolsheviks, Boris Zukov and Nikolai Volkov, Demolition, Axe and Smash variety. The Dream Team, which was Dino Bravo and Greg Valentine. Dino Bravo had replaced Brutus Beefcake. The Hart Foundation, former world champions, Bret Hart and Jim Neidhart. And the Islanders, Haku and Tama. This match came down to Islanders versus the Killer Bees and the Young Stallions. The Killer Bees pulled the masks out and do a switch. You know, they didn't tag. They had masks on to confuse the referee. Did the switch, which was a common ploy in their tag matches. And the Killer Fleas and the Young Stallions win the match. I was a little surprised because the Killer Bees were never going to go anywhere. They never won a title. They were always just a solid mid-card tag team that could put on good tag team matches with the likes of the Hart Foundation. And they were actually good at having good to decent matches on Primetime Wrestling with all the other top teams. But they were not going to win any championships or anything. So I'm wondering if Vince saw something in the Young Stallions, and that's who he was going to try to push after this match. And they never really went as far as I thought they were going to go. They had the bodies that, Vince is looking for. I thought that would, stand them in good stead. They never really accomplished what I thought they would accomplish. And then the main event was Andre the Giant, Butch Reed, King Kong Bundy, One Man Gang, and Rick Rude. And they were wrestling Bam Bam Bigelow, Don Morocco, Hulk Hogan, Ken Patera, and Paul Orndorff. I have said in the past repeatedly, I was never a Hulk Hogan fan. I never cared for him. And this match was a lot of all of the reasons that I didn't like Hogan and why I wanted to see him lose so badly. Now, That works for Vince, though, because if you don't like Hogan and you want to see him lose, you're still going to come see. And if you're like most of the other people, like my cousin Mike, who, were Hulkamaniacs and wanted to see him win, you're going to come out too. So Vince wins either way. But in this match was to set up the eventual title switch at Saturday night's main event with Andre going over Hogan. And then the match at WrestleMania, which would end in a draw so that it would clear the field for Macho Man Randy Savage to win the world title, because Hogan was going to go away for a while to shoot a film. And at one point, the match ends up being one-man gang, the King Kong Bundy, and Andre versus Hogan and Bigelow. And the heels keep Hogan outside of the ring long enough that he gets counted out, but not before he beats up both of them. And he beats up Andre. Andre really had no offense in this match against Hogan. He did against everybody else. But against Hogan, he didn't really get much. And so after Hogan's counted out and has to go back to the back, now it is Bam Bam Bigelow, who they were really pushing at the time, but he's one of those guys Vince changed his mind about later. But at first, he was really being pushed. It's Bam Bam Bigelow versus Bundy, one-man gang, and Andre. And he does manage to get Bigelow does manage to get Bundy and one-man gang out. And then Andre comes in, hits him from behind, beats him. And as Andre is celebrating his victory, here comes Hogan with the belt and hits Andre when he's not looking with the belt and knocks him out of the ring, so Andre doesn't even have a chance to celebrate, and Hogan's left in the ring with his belt posing. These are the kind of things that made me despise Hogan, because I saw him as a showboat. In my mind, as my young 17 or 18-year-old brain was saying, why is this clown coming in here? He can't even let Andre have this victory. He's got to come in and try to hog all the spotlight. I'm sure most fans weren't feeling like that, but I definitely saw it that way. I wanted to see Andre beat Hogan. So when he beat Hogan, and I didn't care it was controversial at Saturday night's main event, I was just glad Hogan wasn't the champion anymore. Of course, that would only last long enough for him to film the movie and come back, and then they were going to put the title right back on the clown. And Hogan was huge in the 80s. I cannot take that away from him. I had a whole group of people wanting to kill me for calling him Bulk Bogus when he came to St. Louis, and Dan and I went to see him at the matches. If I wasn't a kid at the time, I probably would have had to fight a bunch of people. He was just never my cup of tea, and this reinforced it all. This was not the most exciting card in the world, and there was no real jeopardy as there were no championships on the line. They would talk about, oh, well, they're going to be the top contenders now again. Or these people are going to be the top contenders now again because somebody eliminated Sensational Sherry. But I don't think that in the grand scheme of things, the only thing it really set up well was the Andre Hogan match at Saturday night's main event, which is probably all Vince cared about coming out of this card anyway. If there's one match you want to watch on this card, watch the main event. The tag team match, in my opinion, was far too long. The women's wrestlers, one of the few problems with that is you only had like 3 or 4 stars at the time, so you had a lot of other people in the match just to be in the match to make up the 10. So, I mean, Donna Christanello had been on WWF cards a lot in the past, and Dawn Marie was probably local, and so that's the reason they brought her in. You didn't see either one of them on WWF television at that time. And the Intercontinental thing was not a bad match. But if you only have time to watch one match. Watch the main event, Andre's team versus Hogan's team. In the next episode, I will probably review the Survivor Series from this year, but maybe not. I may go back to the 50s because I've been doing a lot of modern wrestling lately. If I can get the boys to watch some of the matches, I'll have them do a podcast with me and just give me their thoughts on it. So that could also be a topic for the next podcast. The history topic is probably going to be Tom Pax, the St. Louis promoter, because I've just recently discovered he actually got started as the full-time St. Louis promoter about 6 months before I thought he had taken over from his uncle John Contos in 1924, but he actually started promoting in September of 1923, and he was originally from Chicago, but his uncle had brought him down to help him with some cards at the end of 1922. That's how Pax he moved to St. Louis in 1923 after being here for those cards and deciding this was something that he wanted to do, be involved in wrestling promotion, and he thought St. Louis had a lot more possibilities than Chicago, which was already pretty developed, and they'd been hosting big matches at that point in time for 15 years or more. So that'll be the topic for the next podcast. If you like this podcast, please like and review. That helps people who don't know about the show find it. And until next time, everybody, take care. Bye-bye.